What's going on, creators? Yeah, I just want to get on here and bring everybody back to now. Appreciate y'all being here and vibing with me for a bit. Yeah, today I talk a little bit about thought transmission and how we can apply a metaphysical principle of what you give to another, you also receive, to start to have more harmonious interactions with people, more loving, caring, types of interactions, less drama, stress, fear, suffering, angst, envy, all these kinds of things that were normal in our old state of mind. Letting go a lot of these mental narratives that are unserving is really important, especially when you realize the stuff that you're holding within your own consciousness about another will be transmitted to them through the subconscious, and they will demonstrate that behavior, that story back to you. It's in understanding the metaphysical principle of as within, so without. The inner world is being externalized onto the screen of space, and that includes people. There's really only one force, one cause, one consciousness going on, being externalized in various amounts of forms, all unique forms. Nobody's the same. Everything in creation is slightly different. And in that, our consciousness and the conscious narratives that we're impressing our subconscious mind with in regards to others is really important, because they will show up exactly how you are portraying them in your consciousness. And so that can be a good thing, if you're portraying them very lovingly and like seeing them as the child of God that they are, as a walking embodiment of like a divine idea. That's one thing, but it's another if you're seeing them through the lens of ego, seeing them through the lens of fear and separation, as like they're a separate brain and a body that's separate from God and separate from creation, and they should be attacked and whatever. All of those kinds of ideas and mental stories about others is what you will then receive from the other. So it's like you can use this principle as a curse and like have everybody that you meet like either like think that you're fucking hideous or fucking a terrible person or whatever, that there's something wrong with you. So then like others will start to kind of mimic that kind of mindset back to you. Mirror it back to you, maybe is an easier way to think about it. But then it can also work as a blessing, where you can start to consciously think about people in a more loving way, especially if they've drifted into a state of consciousness which is shitty, a state of hell almost. Once you start to really practice like awareness and mindfulness, staying present, you start to realize people are either embodying states of heaven or states of hell, fear or love. And ultimately you can only really have a fearful kind of mental narrative about a person, or a loving. So it makes it kind of easy, especially if you catch yourself being reactive to another person. A lot of times we can start to like have our fear being masked with anger or envy or jealousy or something, mainly because we don't understand that, what other people have demonstrated through their manifestations, we can do it too, because there's only one power, one God, one creator that gives all of these things to us all to use and steward. And it's through just awareness, by just knowing that then you start to see that demonstrated more and more so. But doing this simple technique with others is very helpful to kind of reinforce the faith, because as you change the mental narrative, and then you believe that as you see that person differently in yourself, in your own consciousness, in your own mental story, and in that mental story, it's important to realize the dynamic between you and your creator. And it's almost symbolic in the physical, where you have the conscious mind and the subconscious mind. The conscious mind being selective and choosing what it believes to be either true or real or whatever, and then you have the subconscious mind, which is non-selective. It will take any impression that's given to it, and if it's mixed with the belief from the conscious mind, it will then manifest that in your perception. And not only that, but then influence others in this correspondence, where they'll show up exactly the way that your mental narrative is like believing about them. And so knowing that, well, it becomes silly to then like curse the other person, because what you give to another person, you'll receive it. So if you're cursing another person, even in your own consciousness, that's not private. There's an illusion of the old mindset where you can just think any type of wickedness or evil or like attack thoughts or whatever, vengeance even, towards others. And it's like, oh, I can think like this because it has no effect, but it does have an effect. It definitely has an effect on your own consciousness because it lowers your vibe as you're attacking another. There's like a almost satisfaction that comes with attack, but it's not the same as the satisfaction that exists when you stop doing that and you realize how like kind of crazy that is to do, because then you can do the exact opposite and use the same principle in reverse. Well, actually, the correct way, because we were using it in reverse before and creating all this drama and all this illusion of separateness and this illusion that you can think things that are separate from awareness. But when you realize that the conscious mind and the subconscious mind works in the invisible, where it's like by being mindful of your thoughts, by observing your thoughts, you realize that you are not the thoughts. You're the observer. And in that observer role, you're like one with the field of awareness. That awareness is aware of your thoughts. And then as your thoughts and your heart, which could be thoughts and your beliefs, come into alignment, as those are being aligned, if you get those impressed in the subconscious mind, it will manifest exactly as you believe. And it's always doing that. That's one of the things moving into kind of this metaphysical awareness, is realizing that it has always worked like this. This isn't a new thing. It's just realizing what we were doing, letting go of the bad habits that were creating drama, conflict, fear, hell, basically, separation from God, letting go of those unserving beliefs that aren't true, and replacing those with more heavenly beliefs, more harmonious beliefs that are founded in truth. And in that truth, we're to love others as ourselves. Well, once you realize that there is a bigger self in creation, where it's like the more that you're kind of just aware of it, the more that you see it, the more that you believe, the more that it's reflected back to you. But one of the easiest, quickest ways is to realize, all the relationships you already have are already in this correspondence. People are kind of dealing with you exactly how you're dealing with people in your own consciousness, in your own mindset. Oh, Mike, no fucking way, because people are just dumbass sheep, and they're asleep, and they're NPCs and blah 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 blah. It's like, okay, well, there's your programming, and it's not surprising that that's how you're engaging with people, because they're showing up to you like that, because you believe it. But you can start to change that by changing how you're thinking about people. The same thing works in like relationships too, like romantic relationships or whatever, where it's just like, if you're a guy and you're like, you see like a hot chick, or she's your wife even, and it's like a lot of times women will pick up on this connection too, where it's just like, oh, she's, when you're telling yourself negative stories, like, oh no, she's gonna think I'm a weirdo, or she's gonna, whatever you're saying, they will then mirror that shit back to you. So if you're like kind of engaging with someone out of fear and just like desperation, like, I really need your energy so I feel whole and complete, which is like what the old mindset always wants to do, is to be whole and complete by external validations and external idols and fuck all this shit on the outside. But moving forward in who you are in Christ is realizing this, this powerful principle, of consciousness, and through thought transmission, you can start to just gauge in your own self how mindful you're being. What are you speaking into awareness, which is what's going on in your thought world, realizing that God not only hears your thoughts, but then rewards them with an exact correspondence in physical reality. You can start to demonstrate more loving thoughts, just with the people that are already involved in your life. If that's maybe like, if you're in my situation where like I have a handyman business, there's lots of ways you can like communicate, relate, and all this kind of stuff to your customers. The way I've been led to understand business and entrepreneurship is just service to others. And in that, it's just like you can have these mental narratives of like, oh, this person, like maybe you'll catch a vibe off of somebody. With understanding thought transmission, when you catch those vibes off of others, realize that you're somehow connecting with their thoughts. And the more mindful and conscious you are, the easier it is, the more of a clear channel it is, so you can like pick up on people's vibes. Test it for yourself. The less that you're in your own mind in the present moment, just racing with all these what ifs, fears, worst case scenarios, like, are they judging me, or did I say something cool, or did I say something stupid, or blah 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 blah, blah. And all this is chitter chatter. The more that you're able to discipline your mind to think in correspondence with what you actually desire to be thinking, the more that you can be one-on-one with another person. And it's like, I'm catching some weird energy from that person. Well, you could start to like judge them as like, oh, well, they must just have a bunch of whatever, fear going on, suffering going on. And a lot of times people will just say, especially if you're like super present, super aware, vibing really in a divine like harmony, it'll just draw this shit out of people at times, where they'll just start telling you their limiting beliefs out of nowhere. And you could start looking at them like they're a weirdo or whatever, but realize that, okay, whatever they're speaking out of their mouth has already been bouncing around their consciousness, and they need some sort of help. You can impress other people's subconscious just the way you impress your own subconscious through the spoken word for others or the internal word for yourself. Either way, what you give to another, you'll give back to yourself. So when you're dealing with like chronic weird behavior from people, chronic people showing up in a fucked up way, really start to check your own mind. Stop blaming the other people, because they're only mirroring something going on within you. You've given that to them on some level, and you can give them something more elevated. And what I mean by that is you can start maybe seeing them as like they're on the road to awakening. They're every problem that they think they have is going to be resolved. Start telling maybe like you see somebody, and instead where you're just like, that person's like looking like shit, and like I wonder if they're just deep in their addiction or whatever, some negative like thing that you've maybe gossiped and heard about, whatever. Instead of like doubling down on that and transmitting like thoughts of like, you're a loser, you're always going to be a failure, I see you as a dork or whatever, whatever negative story, whatever negative thing you're putting on another person, that's what you're giving, and that's what you're going to receive back from that person. But if you see that, maybe you start doing that, you start telling yourself a negative story about that person. Family situations is especially easy to do this. Marriages are especially easy to do that, because you're so close with these people that it draws these negative programs out of your subconscious. And in the past, you might have like looked at that as like, oh, how dare you make me address this like programming that I have buried in my subconscious that I don't want to deal with. Now I'm dealing with you, and you're drawing it out of me. Now I want to attack you because you are symbolic of this painful thing I don't want to deal with. Well, you can start to look at people and say, hey, in your own self. I mean, you don't have to like say it, until you maybe feel more comfortable doing it, where it's like you start doing it in your mind at first, then they start showing up with that change, and it's like, holy shit, this is working. Then it kind of gives you more faith to like maybe say it and like not to feel like you're going to be like, oh, you put away in the insane asylum for saying, hey, you look really nice today, or hey, I was really excited about the way you did this job. It looks awesome. And, you're really excelling, and, paying people compliments, expressing love. But again, there's only two things that we can really be expressing at any given moment in the present: fear or love. And it's like, is the mental story about this other person based on fear and separation, or is it based on oneness, love, divinity, more and more heaven on earth for not only yourself but for others? Because you can't really experience heaven without giving it away to other people metaphysically. I mean, that's part of like, once you understand the dynamic of what's within, so without, this correspondence, this law of consciousness that, Jesus fulfills, which doesn't abolish the law of correspondence, but kind of enlightens you to the power of your thoughts and your conscious mind and all of these kinds of things. But the more that you're maybe enlightened to how awareness hears your thoughts and it's already doing this, so it's like you don't have to like, okay, what's step one? It's like it's already 20 years deep or 40 years deep or however old you are. It's already that deep. It's already been going like this. So you start to steward what you have, look at what is already manifested in your relationships, and start to transmit ideas, thoughts, whatever, states of consciousness to the people around you that are already around you. There's a kind of, I feel like, a misconception where it's just like, okay, well, I just need to wipe the slate completely clean and start completely over. And it's like, well, everything going on in your life is already an exact externalization of your consciousness, and not only your consciousness, but your relationship with God in relationship to all these external things. One of the things that you start to realize through just spiritual understanding is that we're all one. We're all connected. There's really only one consciousness that we're all experiencing in different phases, and we're in different levels of awareness. But ultimately, at the end, we all just go back to this one consciousness. And knowing that, realizing that consciousness, in the beginning was God, and everything in the physical is made up of that one substance. It's like, you start to think like metaphysically. It's like, in the beginning there was God. So what did God create the universe out of? Well, the only substance that was there, which was consciousness. And so, everything, is actually just kind of one thing being demonstrated in different levels of awareness, different levels of vibration. But like, our old mindset used to go, oh, well, this is a Sharpie, and this is a guitar pick, and this is this is an Allen wrench, and this is some I don't know, this is for an air compressor. All these little stories, all these little separate things. That's like, oh, it's not. This is a useful part of consciousness, of imagination made form. Someone had to think about this. These ball bearings in here, and and then in that process, taking an idea, bringing it into physical reality, manifesting it, for the benefit of others to use and everything else. But ultimately, the more that you understand how we're all connected, the more that you start to realize what you give, you receive. And so if you're giving a lot of like positivity towards another, it'll come back to you either from that person or just from other elements of creation as a correspondence to your mental activity. If you don't have the mental activity, for example, but you have like this terrible attitude towards people, but you're trying to be like good by just like forcing yourself to be good. It's like, oh, I really hate these people at church, and I really hate the idea that I have to spend an hour and a half on like a during the week to like participate in like a bake sale or something, but I feel like guilty, and so I'm doing it because I want to be a good person. But then the entire time you're having all these negatives about the people around you, about how they're like, oh, these people are so fucking judgmental, even though it's like you're the one being judgmental. And then like, again, what you give, you receive both ways. So it's like, it's a blessing and a curse depending on how you're using it. There's not two separate powers. There's one power, either being used as a curse or a blessing. That's a very important thing to realize, because part of the old mindset is convinced that there's a separate force that challenges God. And that's a satanic belief, and part of that, if you look at Job, is an excellent example of like what I'm talking about, because in that story, I used to be like kind of triggered by Job. That whole idea that okay, so you have Job, which is like a righteous person. If you're not familiar with this story, so you got like a righteous person. And by righteous, I just mean, like a good person in society. He's not a fucking deviant, not a criminal, not hurting people, but, just taking care of business, getting shit done, with his family, just doing shit. He had lots of money, he had friends, he had family, he had a relationship with God that was on point. And then, out of nowhere, there's a challenge to that. His fears come upon him. And in that story, you have the element of Satan that comes to God and says, well, he's only like this because you've blessed him. So if all these things were taken away, then his consciousness will reflect this. It'll curse you. It'll cause separation and division and all this kind of shit. Well, the creator's like, no, that's not going to happen. And so the fears come upon him, which you can look at it metaphysically as in our own consciousness, we have this battle going on until we realize what's going on. This is part of the unconsciousness, where it's like we don't realize how important our thoughts are. We don't realize how important our beliefs are. We just don't really comprehend it. And then what happens is then the fear comes upon us, and then we start to manifest our fears unconsciously. We don't realize what we're doing. It's like all of a sudden, it's just like, oh, first you lose your job, then your family starts to fall apart, then your friends are like, what the you're cursed, you're sinning, or you're doing something fucked up, God's punishing you. And it's like, I'm not doing anything, but on a metaphysical level, you are doing something, because this spiral starts to happen in consciousness then too, which then starts to then permeate the subconscious, which then starts to be externalized onto the screen of space, and you start to see how the same power, because ultimately, even in Job's scenario, God was in control. And if you look at Deuteronomy, it says, God kills and God makes alive, curses and blesses. It's understanding this law and not trying to do mental gymnastics around it. And so it's like, okay, well, what was the solution for Job? Well, the solution was when Job started to pray for his friends, he started to become blessed again. And so we can use the same principle when our fears come upon us, or, things in the creation start to mirror all of our limiting beliefs, all of our fears, all these undesirable things start to penetrate our subconscious, be externalized onto the screen of space, including our interactions with people. Through this connection through the subconscious, well, then the remedy is to start to give them a higher state of mind, to start give them more heaven. And as you do that, the correspondence is it comes back to you. Yes, it's like you give that to these others. Well, the others are reflecting a state of a belief, a word, an idea, a thought made flesh, a word made flesh. We're all children of God. We are all, if you look at Jesus, the life of Jesus, he says, we're brothers and sisters and family and friends, not to put him on a pedestal, but we are the created, we're the sons and daughters, we're the created, we're all one in the body of Christ. And so nobody's really on this pedestal. The pedestal is by you putting people on a pedestal. That's something you're doing, but ultimately we are all expressing an idea in God's mind in the physical world at a different phase of consciousness that we get to, on some level, have the free will and the freedom to demonstrate who we are, to play the same game that God plays on some level of, who am I? What am I? What is possible? What is this for? Asking these big questions, and being able to kind of grasp the infinite being created in the finite, so that you can experience, so it can experience itself, because you can't experience, the infinite can't experience itself save through the finite for some reason, but that's just kind of going on a different rabbit hole. But when it comes to thought transmission, thought telepathy, giving states of consciousness, Neville Goddard and the law of assumption, he always talked about, elevating people, but the golden rule, do unto others as you'd have them do unto you, because they are part of you. And what you do give to another, you will receive back to yourself. So if you're giving criticism to another, expect criticism to come back to you. Because it's all part of God's consciousness being externalized. The bigger self's consciousness is, it's within you, but then it's also outside of you, because it's part of the reflection. And, part of the illusion of the 3D world is I believe, when you get to a certain spot, you realize that everything physical has a spiritual root. and that root is in consciousness. And once you discover that and know it for a fact, hopefully by, just personal experience, because how else are you going to know it? But like the thing of it is, it's like the more that you try this out, this thought transmission, and you'll start to see tangible results in the way people show up in your life, show up just around you. They could be a complete prick to 99% of people, but for you, you might just not be button heads. You might just like get along for some reason. And that some reason is because you see the Christ in them. And as you give that to another, that draws it out of them, and they start to demonstrate that back to you. And so, and it works both ways, and it can be a curse. You can be cursing them, and they'll come back and curse you right back, or you can bless them, and they'll bless you right back. And this is something you can try for yourself. So don't just take my word for it. Demonstrate it for your own self and see that it's true, and start experiencing more harmony with the people around you, more love, and instead of just fear and feeling like you're separate and alone, because you're not alone. Everybody is reflecting that belief back to you. And if you believe like you're alone, well, how can you be alone when God's within you? And not only that, God is everyone around you at different levels of knowing that. Some people have no concept of that. God's completely asleep in them. That's okay. That's not for us to really like be like, oh, it's happening for a reason, and we're all going to end up in the same spot anyway, through giving and receiving. So you're either giving heaven to others and experiencing heaven coming back to you, or you're giving hell, fear, separation, suffering to others and experiencing that coming back to you. So what do you want to experience? You want to experience more and more people being shitty towards you, or do you want to make a change and start seeing people coming to you altered, more divinely, expressing who they truly are in Christ? Keep that metaphysical principle in mind. Give and receive. What you give to another, you receive. And what you've already given in the past, because there's a delayed reflection going on in the present moment. If you look at it as like a delayed mirror, maybe today you're starting to see somebody through a lens of like less judgment, more how does God see this person? How does love see this person? How does our Creator see this person? Because our Creator loves that person, even if you don't. If like it's a big pill to swallow when you have like your children or whatever, and it's like, well, I love them. It's like, well, infinite intelligence loves them more than you can comprehend. So. And that's like that for everybody. It's like you can have judgments and like hate somebody, but that's not the way love looks at that person. God just sees them in a state, and they can choose from any. I mean, when you really start to try to unpack infinity, there's infinite states, which is mind-blowing, because we have the states that we're aware of from our past, but to realize that the states, as you elevate your consciousness to like this mountaintop, this level, well, then you see 2 or 3 more states that you didn't even know were possible. Then you hit that level, and then you see 2 or 3 more states that you didn't even know were possible. And that goes on for infinity, forever. It doesn't stop. And that's part of the joy of expansion, is like you can keep on expanding and expanding. There's no limit to expansion. And in that knowing, then you're doing something that God wants to be doing with you, as you, through you type thing, where it's like, okay, well, I'm expanding my awareness of love in the present moment, and I'm starting to see that reflection being drawn back to me and my own like perception of reality. And my interactions with people and my interactions with others, they're mirroring a lot more love and friendliness and like, taking an interest in whatever. They're showing up exactly as the corresponding mental activity. That's what you're giving to them. And, some people can be drawn to you that are in like perfect harmony with you. Others are in desperate need of what you have, and they're being drawn to you too. Everybody's being drawn to you. You watching this, you are drawn to this on some level. Nothing's an accident, nothing's a coincidence. There is a reason for it, but a big part of that reason is in your own consciousness, which you're allowing to penetrate into awareness, and your beliefs create the situation. And if that situation is just drama and fucking resistance and bullshit with others, well, that's something that you can work on within your own self right now, realizing that as you're doing that, as you're maybe having a different mental conversation, whereas like in the past you might have been thinking of attacking them or thinking what a loser they are, or it's like, oh, what a dork, or whatever negative thing you're saying about another person, realizing that that's penetrating into awareness. God hears it. God doesn't really care. God will reward you with exactly what you're doing, and whatever shit you were telling another person, whatever energy that you were putting into it, it's going to come back to you a lot of times multiplied. So if you're being like a shithead towards another person, don't be surprised if what you give, you receive it back, because we're all one, we're all connected. That's something going on within your consciousness. But a big part of forgiveness is maybe seeing that maybe they are demonstrating like maybe they're just like having a fucked up thing when it comes to, I don't know, their life's purpose or like their career or something. Maybe they're struggling with that, and maybe you're not, and they get drawn to you. Well, some people get drawn to you as a mirror. Other people, is to forgive that state, because as you're forgiving it in another, you're also, that exists within you too. So all these negative states also are within your own consciousness. And it depends. You gotta check your unconscious story. Whenever think of somebody that's like pissing you off, oh boom, that's why. Then you start having these scripts that come to the surface of awareness, to your consciousness. You see it. I was like, oh yeah, they're fucking prick because of this happened 5 months ago. And that's still the story you're hanging on to. Well, as you're thinking about that person in that way, it's being transmitted to them, and they're thinking about it too. Not consciously. If you're like unconscious and not disciplined in your mind, if you're thinking, if somebody that's more conscious than you is thinking about you, then you're having the same kind of like thoughts about that person, and it's like you're getting reactive to their own consciousness. And then, like I said, through the metaphysical principle of giving and receiving, then they won't consciously know that they're doing it, but they'll show up in your fucking space just like that. And then in dropping it and forgiving them also forgives part of you that was also doing that, because what you're giving to them, you're receiving it. So if you're getting a bunch of drama, you're playing a role in it. But forgiving them out of that state, seeing them as the blessed child of God that they are, that is powerful, that their thoughts are creating the experiences of their life, just the same as it's doing for you. The only difference is you might be more aware of it than them. Well, as you give to another, then you'll see it, And so I think I'm starting to ramble. Hopefully this was enough of a a reminder, I guess, to think about people in a more positive way, because when you really understand what you're giving to another, you're giving to yourself. The stories that you're telling yourself about these people, I mean, they could even be strangers, and you're walking by, you'd be like, oh, hey, beautiful, in your mind, or, oh, get away from me. Oh, this person is super attractive. Oh, this person is repulsive. It's like, and it's like you're having these thoughts about, some of those thoughts are not even coming from you. It's coming from the other person that you're just picking up on. And it's like you could be standing there and like have this weird thought about this person of like, but then the more that you realize that, hey, that's probably that's their drama that I'm picking up on. I'm like assuming it's part of my consciousness, but I'm not thinking about them in that way. Well, then you start to kind of key in more onto the telepathy, to the thought transmission aspect of things, which exists. And the more that you try it for yourself and just really put it on, just do it with the people around you. Elevate their state of mind, get them out of states of fear into more states of unity and oneness. But ultimately, just like kind of what I like to do is just like what you like. If people ask, give them that state in your mind. Start seeing them as you would like to see them, as they would like to see themselves. If for example, somebody around you is like dieting, exercising, really putting fitness and health, like I'm making that lifestyle change, I'm doing this shit, don't see them as like just being a lost cause. They're seeing them as, and that might even be picking up on some of their bullshit. It's like, that's not who you are. You're not a lost cause. It's like, you're doing this shit. Start seeing them as being fit and healthy. Start seeing them as accomplishing their goals. Start seeing them as that new person, because we all had the old that was just unconscious, being programmed by the external world like an automaton. Well, then the new creation that we are is consciously choosing and consciously thinking in terms of who we are in relationship with God and Jesus and heaven and all the Holy Spirit, all these things. Is that true of Jesus? Because you really, getting out of the idea that they're like separate from God and separate from heaven, as part of our own bullshit and stuff that we need to let go of, and realizing that other people hear our thoughts, that pick up on those vibes, that energy at the very minimum. The more that you do, the more you can have a thought and the other person will say it. It's fucking crazy. But it's like the more that you're mindful, aware, present, the more that it's easier and easier to pick this up on. And even Jesus, in the Bible, was like he knew their thoughts and stuff. And it's like, I feel like the more that you become mindful and aware in the present moment, the more that people either tell you what's bothering them, demonstrate what you're already thinking about them, or come into a correspondence and we take each other to the next level. It just depends on where you're operating from: fear and separation, or love and heaven and unity and oneness. It just really depends on what you're into. But with that being said, I think we'll bounce. I appreciate you guys liking, sharing, subscribing, all the social networking things. I appreciate your spiritual support and your physical support. Thank you for that. I appreciate it. Appreciate your attention for this long. Hopefully I was a good steward of it. Hopefully you're strengthened as a result of this stream. And until the next now, God bless.